The fivefold strategy for stilling thoughts seems to be a pure samatha exercise, judging from the phrasing of the conclusion of each step. Now I want to bring you back to that Vitakasantana Sutta. Remember I told you about the 5 steps. At the end of each step, it says, we see on page 66, with the abandoning, right within, the mind steadies, settles, becomes unified, and is composed. Now, what does this indicate? This shows that the 4 steps of samatha is mentioned, isn't it? These are the 4 steps of samatha. The mind steadies, settles, becomes unified, and is composed. So we can conclude that this whole sutta is about samatha. These are 5 ways of doing samatha. Now, on page 66, in the second paragraph, you see, monks, the drawbacks of those thoughts are to be scrutinized by that monk. Okay? And then at the end of it is a ... Right or not? These thoughts of mine result in suffering, ... Now, what is elided is this thing that is highlighted above. You know? So when he reflects on the drawbacks of those thoughts, then his mind also will become steady, will settle, become unified, and will be composed. All right? So this so-called refrain is repeated after each paragraph. Those thoughts are to be forgotten, not to be attended to by that monk. Okay? Also that is followed by this eventually. So if he forgets or ignores those thoughts, then eventually his mind also will become composed. Similarly for the stilling of the thought sankhara. If he manages to still the thought sankhara, the mind also will become steady, become settled, become unified and composed. All right? So this shows that each of these steps result in samadhi. Each of these steps is a samatha exercise. Okay? Now we will go on to page 70. Even the last one. Monks with teeth gritted against teeth and tongue pressed against the roof of the mouth, the mind is to be mentally repressed, suppressed and quashed by that monk. By doing that also, his mind will become steady and become composed. So he will also reach samadhi. So would you associate this type of samadhi with jhana? Would you say that the samadhi that is gained by gritting your teeth and squashing your thought will result in jhana? Huh? No, isn't it? So most people think that samadhi equals jhana. But not necessarily so. Samadhi actually has a range. You know? That's why this section is called the range of how samadhi is attained in the Pali Suttas. Because samadhi is the last step of samatha. So that's why now I'm trying to find out, okay, the last step of samatha is samadhi. What sort of samadhi are we referring to? Is it only jhana samadhi, or could it be samadhi before jhana, or any other type of samadhi that is not necessarily jhana? Okay, that's why the next section is called the range of how samadhi is attained in the Pali canon. Yeah, we are going to investigate to see, you know, the various ways or mental states that are involved in the process of getting samadhi, and to find out what type of samadhi it is. Is it only jhana, or is it something else? Okay? All right, so now, at the end of this sutta, at the grand conclusion, he says, by doing all these 5 methods, those evil, unskillful thoughts are abandoned. They go away with the abandoning, right within the mind steadies, settles, becomes unified, and is composed. In other words, he has attained samadhi. Then, it goes on to the next paragraph, which is the conclusion, the grand conclusion. This monks, is called a master of the habitual ways of thought. Whatever thought he wishes, that thought he will think. Whatever thought he does not wish, that thought he will not think. He has cut off craving, turned back the fetters, and with the complete comprehension of conceit, made an end of suffering. This implies that he has become an arahant, right? And he seems to have done it solely with samatha, no vipassana. Because this whole sutta is about samatha, how to still the mind. 5 ways of doing so. So the discussion topic is, this suggests that arahantship can be attained without practicing vipassana at all. What do you think? Okay, give reasons for your answer. Okay, clear enough? Okay, please start your discussion. The question is, this sutta, Vittaka Santana Sutta, seems to suggest that by just doing samatha, one can become an arahant without doing vipassana. All right, so now I'm asking you for your opinion, whether, it is possible or not, and what do you think? What is your reason? Okay.
Okay, good evening, Pandey. Okay, from our group discussion, our answer is no. That samatha alone will not allow one to be enlightened. Okay.
Then how do you explain this inconsistency? How about this? What does this concluding paragraph say?
Okay, the reason is
okay.
Because there are 4 types of people. Number one is one who has samatha but no vipassana. Second one is one with vipassana but no samatha. The third one is without neither. The fourth one is both. So we believe that this sutta could have been preached to one who has already got vipassana. Okay, and after that, through samatha, he attained enlightenment.
Oh, okay. Why not you say, preach to someone who has already done vipassana in a past life? Also can one.
It could be this life or past life. So from number 2, he becomes number 4.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good. Yeah, not bad.
The question is the attainment of arahantship. In order to do that, we need to then define arahant according to what is mentioned in sutras. My sutra knowledge is limited. I know of only 2 main ways to define arahant. First one is about eradication of all 10 fetters. The second one is the attainment of vijja and vimutti. All right, we talk about the first one. If we refer to page 70 at the bottom, it is mentioned very clearly that in the last sentence, he has cut off craving, and the second phrase there is important. Turn back the fetters. And finally, the last word, made an end to suffering. So turn back the fetters, and in order to attain the end of suffering, the end of suffering is nibbana, which means that person has become an arahant. Turn back the fetters means he has eradicated all 10 fetters. Now, if you think about the practice of samatha, is it possible to eradicate all 10 fetters? I think that is more likely the question. Can one eradicate all 10 fetters from the practice of samatha? Personally, I think yes.
Yes, can.
Well, that's what the sutra said here. Right? I also agree that it is possible by the practice of samatha.
Why?
That the tranquil mind is no longer affected by any disturbances, emotions, whatsoever. And here he says, cut off craving. And that's a key thing. Cut off dukkha already. No more tanha, no more dukkha. and turn back the fetters. Complete comprehension of conceit. Well, I guess, okay, I'll come back to that. Complete comprehension of conceit and end of suffering. So I think it is quite clear. Here it is mentioned that the 10 fetters have been eradicated. Therefore, by that definition, agree can be arahant.
Okay.
There is a second view though. The other definition, I recall reading it in the Anapanasati Sutra towards the end, that to attain Nibbana, one has to finally accomplish vijja and vimutti. After practicing because it says something like, when Anapanasati is fully cultivated and developed, leads to Satipatthana. When Satipatthana fully cultivated, developed, leads to Sattva-bojjhanga. When Sattva-bojjhanga fully cultivated, developed, leads to vijja and vimutti, and that is Nibbana basically. Now, on that criteria of vijja, which is full knowing, therefore, the question is that can one actually gain all the knowledge without practicing vipassana? So there is a school of thought that it is not possible. Without practicing vipassana, one cannot have full vijja, right? No full vijja. And therefore no vimutti. But if we look at this, the second last phrase, with the complete comprehension of conceit, this is then suggesting that there is full vijja. There is no avijja. But so in other words, the other definition of arahant says no, it's not possible to become an arahant without practicing vipassana because you cannot attain full vijja. That's what I understand it to be.
Okay.
So the answer can be both, depending on whether you agree that this full vijja can be attained without vipassana.
Okay, thank you.
So after our group discussion, we came to the conclusion, no, it's not true. We feel that vipassana must be practiced to attain this arahantship. Hand in hand, samatha and vipassana together.
So, there's something wrong with this sutta?
No, maybe misinterpretation. So, just now, okay, the one interpretation from the Tatiya Samadhi Sutta, there's a proof, evidence here that Buddha instructed those who are not obtainer of vipassana to seek those who are the obtainer of vipassana, and vice versa. So that shows both in samatha and this vipassana are required, equally important. Second reference is the Vitakka Santana Sutta. So actually the conclusion of the sutta, it has a phrase of complete comprehension of conceit. You see, he say, okay, you practice samatha, but still have to get rid of the fetters and all the cravings. Then there's a phrase we mention, complete comprehension of conceit. So this phrase contains some wisdom aspect, which can be only comprehended by vipassana.
So you feel that it's implicit, although it's not explicitly stated.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the way he did vipassana.
Indirectly.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
I looked up in a reference book and I found out that the Chinese equivalent does not include that last sentence. All right, so the Chinese equivalent of this sutta follows virtually exactly the same, except it leaves out that last bit about arahantship. So that suggests that it could have been inserted later or added in because it's not in the Chinese Agama. Or it could have been dropped in the Chinese, right. Or they could have been scratching their heads and dropped it in the Chinese, right. They couldn't figure the answer out either, so they dropped it. That's the other option. Okay, so I just wanted to add that point to what was discussed earlier.
Right.
In the earlier sutta, it talks about people who have samatha and no vipassana should do vipassana, and then the other way around. So I'm thinking that this one is just, the Buddha was talking to people who have already vipassana, but no samatha. So it's just filling up the gap. So he doesn't need to talk about that part. You just need to fill up this thing and you're done.
Why not say they have already done vipassana in a past life?
Well, they already have it, so you don't have to tell them to do that which they already have. So therefore, by doing that, then it's finished.
Okay, thank you.
So our group has come up not only with one answer, not only with two answers, but with 5 answers. So first possible answer is, this sutta is not exclusive, but samatha, it's not exclusively samatha, but it is implied that the practitioner is also doing vipassana along the way. But it does not say that directly in the sutta, but one can maybe assume it, because from other passages in the suttas we know, or we assume that one cannot attain liberation with samatha alone. So if we follow that principle, samatha alone should not be sufficient. Okay? Number 2, in the second method of this discourse, one contemplates akusala, vitaka, unwholesome thoughts. And in the opinion of some of our group members, this kind of contemplation and thinking about the disadvantages of unwholesome thoughts, that's also seen as a form of investigation and vipassana practice. So some group members would say that also could hint that vipassana is practiced maybe along the way. Any thoughts, any comments?
Actually, we should look at how it is phrased, you know. What is that? Page 66, the drawbacks of these thoughts are to be scrutinized by that monk thus. Truly, these thoughts of mine are unskillful. These thoughts of mine are blameworthy. These thoughts of mine result in suffering. So you're talking about that suffering, is it? That dukkha?
Yes, yes. Yes.
Okay.
And that also already links on very nicely to number 3, where the sutta teaches how to attain samma samadhi. The Buddha would not teach anything else than samma samadhi. He wouldn't teach miccha samadhi, wrong concentration or wrong composure, right? So if you assume that the Buddha teaches only samma samadhi is defined as including all other 7 path factors as well. So it starts with right view and goes on with to right mindfulness and up to samma samadhi. So since the other path factors are included in samma samadhi, that means that he is also having wisdom and understanding and practicing vipassana as well.
But is this samma samadhi? In this sutta talks about samma samadhi?
It doesn't say samma samadhi, but would the Buddha teach miccha samadhi?
Well, I mean, in this sutta there's nothing mentioned about the other path factors.
Right.
It's just a matter of one way of stilling the mind.
Okay.
Well, this may not be miccha samadhi, this may not be samma samadhi, it's just samadhi.
Okay, I agree.
All right. Yeah, okay.
That's why we have that's why we have 2 more explanations.
Okay.
Number 4, we assume that the audience of this discourse has practiced vipassana already.
Yeah.
And then the Yoganata Sutta is basically the same as the previous speaker just mentioned. The Yoganata Sutta mentions 4 different ways of liberation. One person is doing samatha first and vipassana afterwards, and the second one is doing vipassana first and samatha afterwards. So this could be a case of people who have done vipassana already. The Buddha is giving them now instructions for samatha, and therefore it's enough for liberation. Okay? And number 5, and I think that's maybe our main explanation, or we don't know. So comparative studies have been done to the Chinese parallel version to this discourse, in the Chinese agamas, and it seems that the concluding phrase is not present in the Chinese agamas. So the phrase which says that after practicing all those different practices, the samatha practices, the sutta does not close with a statement that he becomes an arahant and the samyojanas are overcome. That's not present in the Chinese parallel version to this discourse. So that could be another explanation, that maybe along the line the Pali version of the discourse could have become corrupted, and then the whole issue, the whole topic would not arise at first hand.
I mean, this one to say that the sutta is not exclusively about samatha, but implied, that samatha is implied. One could do that for any sutta. Whatever we see that anything is not mentioned there, we just say, well, it's not mentioned, but it's probably implied, because the ending says so. Or you can apply this principle for any sutta. And the second method, you contemplate on the drawbacks of the unwholesome thought. And one of the contemplations is that this thought of mine will lead to suffering. I don't think that this is convincing enough, to just because there's only one word suffering is found in the contemplation. Because in that contemplation also, there's this identification with mind, my thoughts. These thoughts of mine are unwholesome, unskillful, it will lead to suffering. It need not necessarily mean that it's looking at it from a vipassana point of view. But it's also possible. So, this is questionable. And then the third one, he says that the Buddha only teaches Samma Samadhi. So Samma Samadhi includes all the 7 path factors. But here I pointed out that, well, it's neither Samma Samadhi nor Miccha Samadhi, it's just Samadhi. It need not necessarily be right or wrong Samadhi. This is just a way of getting Samadhi. Then number 4, we assume that the audience of the discourse have practiced vipassana already. The first group said that just now. Another assumption. Assumption we can either prove nor disprove. So if you look at page 128, it seems that both are required. It's just that the assumption that the Buddha is talking to one who has already done vipassana before or not, that's the only thing that we can neither prove nor disprove. So if we assume that he is teaching this Vitakka Sandana Sutta to somebody who has already done vipassana before, then of course it's possible, right? Because he's already got a basis for it. So if you look at page 128, you see that the relationship between samatha and vipassana, there's a share in gnosis. Samatha is for the sake of abandoning passion, and vipassana is for the sake of abandoning avijja and developing wisdom. So when you abandon passion, you do not really achieve liberation yet. You only achieve liberation when ignorance is abandoned. So it seems that wisdom is required. Then the last one is about the parallel version does not have arahantship. There is a Chinese parallel to this sutta where all these 5 methods are also mentioned, but they did not end with the same ending. The grand conclusion here is missing. There's nothing mentioned about attaining arahantship. He just says that he is a master of his thoughts. Full stop. He doesn't go on to say that he has turned back the fetters, he has, with the complete comprehension of conceit, he has made an end of suffering. There's one scholar, practitioner monk in Germany by the name of Asma Analayo. He has made a comparative study of the Majjhima Nikaya and the Madhyama Agama, the Chinese Agama. If you look at the phrasing of that conclusion, you will see that there are actually 3 tenses used. The first sentence is in the present tense. This person is called a master of habitual ways of thought. And then whatever thought he wants to think, he will think. Whatever thoughts he doesn't want to think, he will not think. This is in the future. But he has already cut off craving, turned back the fetters, and this is in the past tense. So it seems that the order is a bit muddled up. The cause is right at the end, and the effect is in the beginning. Right? He should have said that, he has cut off craving, therefore he is a master of habitual ways of thoughts, and he will think what he wants to think. But this one is opposite. So, this is also another criticism that was highlighted by Asma Analayo. And he said that this is missing in the Chinese parallel. And he also managed to find a similar passage in the Majjhima Nikaya called the Sabbasava Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 2. The Buddha talked about various sorts of taints There are attaineds that should be abandoned by seeing. There are attaineds that should be abandoned by restraining. There are attaineds that should be abandoned by using. There are attaineds that should be abandoned by enduring. There are attaineds that should be abandoned by avoiding. There are attaineds that should be abandoned by removing. There are attaineds that should be abandoned by developing. So if you want to find out more about what are these attaineds, then please look up Majjhima Nikaya number 2. Right? So here is all elaborated in the sutta. What are the attaineds to be abandoned by seeing, and what are the attaineds that are to be abandoned by using, by enduring, by avoiding, by removing, by developing. Okay? So in the conclusion, the Buddha says that when all these attaineds that should be abandoned by seeing have been abandoned by seeing, etc., etc., when all these attaineds have been abandoned, then what happens is, he says, he is called a bhikkhu who dwells restrained with the restraint of all attaineds. And here, he has severed craving, flung off the fetters, and with the complete penetration of conceit, he has made an end of suffering. Now, this line is exactly the same as ours in this Vitakka Santana Sutta. It's just that the English translation is a bit different, but the Pali is exactly the same. So, I mean, it is his theory that this could have been a faulty transmission, a faulty copy and paste job. I mean, this is only another theory, right? So there are many theories that are floating around. Yeah, like the other, we got 5 here, and then some more, one, yeah, another one from the back. And this is another theory from Aisma Analayo. Okay? So looking at this sutta, of course, this is only one example. Sometimes when things seem to be rather inconsistent or not very clear, it is best that we have access to the other versions, you know, to check with other versions. If you're able to check with the Tibetan version and the Chinese version, and we find that in those 2 versions, and the Sanskrit version, in all those 3 versions, you know, this is lacking. This paragraph is missing, and it's only found in our version, then there's something wrong, isn't it? In the same way, if something is found exclusively in the Chinese Agama, but not in our suttas, then it's also suspect. So, I mean, the best thing would be, the ideal would be to know everything, you know, all the suttas, and you can compare. But I doubt that many of us have the aptitude nor the time to do that.